Good evening, everybody. My name is Wayne Ranney, and I serve on the board of directors for the Grand Canyon Historical Society. And we welcome you to tonight's virtual outing. The Grand Canyon Historical Society, our mission is to celebrate and promote the study and preservation of the Grand Canyon region's cultural and natural history for the education and enjoyment of its members and the public. And just last year in 2024, we celebrated 40 years of existence when the society was started by some pioneer members of Grand Canyon Village. We encourage you to become a member. Our dues are only $35 a year. We are an all-volunteer organization, and we're hopeful that many of you can join us so that we can continue to expand all of our activities like these virtual outings and in-person outings and our tri-annual history symposiums. If you do become a member, you'll get 4 issues in the calendar year of the Old Pioneer magazine, which has a lot of history articles about the Grand Canyon and the Grand Canyon region. So we do these virtual outings. We conduct tours at the South and North Rim, and you can find it on our website. Our website is very easy, grandcanyonhistory.org.
So a brief bio here. Morgan Sjogren is an author, explorer, and defender of wild places. She has written for Arizona Highways, and her books include The Best Bears Ears National Monument Hikes, Outlandish, Fuel Your Epic, The Best Grand Canyon, Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument Hikes, and those are by the Colorado Mountain Club. Those are pack guides. Morgan's writing focuses on human-powered adventure, public lands, conservation, history, travel, and food. Morgan devotes much of her time to advocate, educate, and inspire others to help protect endangered landscapes and the environment. A nomad by nature, Morgan lives on the Colorado Plateau and feels most at home in the wild.
This is where I would be like, okay, I've rested. So I'm going to be talking about falling in love with the desert, and it's going to be specific to the Glen Canyon region and Bears Ears National Monument. But before we take off in some time travel and desert wanderings, I want each of you to think about a place that's near and dear to your heart that you love, either close to home or somewhere that you traveled to that has had a profound effect on you, some place that the place you go to in your head when you want to escape or you dream of traveling to, some place that you could even use the big terrifying L word about. And once you have that word, I'd like for you to write it in the center of the heart on your piece of paper. And tonight, as we go through this journey, even though it's about Glen Canyon, and that's a place that's so dear to my heart and that I unabashedly love, I'd also like you to think about these sentiments and topics, and you can apply them to the place that you love. Oh, music's starting. We'll get into why as we go. So here we go. And later on, I'm gonna ask some of you to share. It's gonna be backwards. I look forward to seeing what everyone creates. Okay, onward. Let's see if I can figure out this. So, yes, this is Charles Bernheimer, and this is me, Morgan Sjogren, and we are two people 100 years apart who fell in love with, and it's a little hard to see on here, but essentially it's the Colorado River country from Canyonlands National Park all the way to Glen Canyon Dam, and we'll say the radius, we'll put it, a couple hundred miles around that, and that's the terrain we're trying to cover tonight, which is impossible to digest, which is why I also wanted you to write down your happy place so we can focus more or less, not just on the specific place we're going to, but what it is to love a place and want to protect it, and what the very real threats are to these places that we love, and how history is a thread that connects us with this journey. So the talk today is about the Bernheimer Expeditions, which were a series of pack train trips between 1919 and 1930, funded by Charles L. Bernheimer, who was a wealthy businessman from Manhattan. We will get more specifically into who he was and these trips were, but every year for about a month during this decade, minus a few years, which is, COVID things, they had the influenza pandemic. He would take these month-long trips all over the Navajo Nation. They went to Canyon del Muerto in the Navajo Nation. They went around Bears Ears, Glen Canyon, Monument Valley. And he really wanted to do something more with his vacations. This was one of the wealthiest guys in New York City. He had a cotton goods manufacturing business. But he wanted not just to be, a great explorer, but to give back. And so he funded these research expeditions for the American Museum of Natural History to do archaeological reconnaissance. I am going to play a short video so you kind of have a sense of where we're going with this. This is like going on a hike. It's impossible for me to explain everything all at once. I hope this all unfolds as we go, and maybe by the end you'll know why we're talking about this guy.
When you get to the fork in the trail, will you choose the path of progress or the path of light? For the past 4 years, I've been following the footsteps of a ghost around the canyons of southern Utah and northern Arizona, retracing the Bernheimer expeditions from the 1920s. Using historic journals and photos, I've pieced together his enigmatic routes and witnessed how much the desert has changed. The last century reflects the clashing values of preserving the natural world and extracting resources from it in the name of so-called progress. How we proceed requires our delicate attention. Looking to the past has given me a sense of direction and a light to guide me home. I have walked alongside Bernheimer and friends, past and present, with hopeful steps, witnessing landscape miracles, the protection of Bears Ears National Monument, and reemergence of Glen Canyon. At nature's pace, there is always time for renewal.
Okay.
When you get
So back to Bernheimer. I met Bernheimer through his book, Rainbow Bridge, which was written in 1924. And I was actually living out in Bears Ears, and this was one of the books that I had come across. I love reading about the places that I am either traveling through or visiting in. And Bears Ears at this time in my life was home. And so I'm going to do the first reading yet of my book about these expeditions, Path of Light, which I hope will give some insight of who Bernheimer is, why we're in Bears Ears, how I know this guy from 100 years ago. Yes, this is weird. Please hang in there. Okay. At the edge of the sandstone precipice, wind gusts against my torso as I lean over Glen Canyon, now a dammed reservoir known as Lake Powell. I stretch my imagination to drain the glaring blue water, letting it pass through the antiquated dam. I repaint the white bathtub ring red and scour the sediment down to bedrock. After the cleanup, a free-flowing muddy ribbon returns, caressing the high walls of this sensuously curving canyon. Its exposed walls revealing golden tributaries, alive with running springs, coyote willows, wild orchids, and weeping maidenhair ferns. Between my feet in the water, I read the rust, orange, and cream-colored strata, a document spanning millions of years. In this palimpsest, human life is but a blip, yet it leaves the deepest scars. To orient myself requires ongoing study. The earth's creases, faults, and sinews have more to teach than lines across folded sheets of paper. I let the desert guide me because I can always get lost in the stories it tells. Mine dwells here too. In the winter of 2019, I was living out of my Jeep in Bears Ears National Monument, located in southeastern Utah. All my possessions were packed inside my mud-encrusted Jeep, a cliff dwelling on wheels. I slept between 2 stacks of books, curled up in a thrift store fur coat and a pile of down blankets. On interminable winter nights, I commune with the people walking the pages of canyon country history, whose stories were an antidote to the lonesome atmosphere of the frozen desert. Among the books in the collection, one captivated me, Rainbow Bridge by Charles Bernheimer in 1924, based upon his journals from a series of expeditions to Rainbow Bridge, Glen Canyon, and the Navajo Nation. These are places I had not yet traveled to, but were connected to my current location by Canyon Country's arterial system. Inspired to be more than a sightseeing tourist, Bernheimer wanted to do in a small way what our big explorers and discoverers were permitted to do on a heroic scale. To accomplish this, he organized a series of 10 expeditions between 1919 and 1930. These were funded on behalf of the American Museum of Natural History in New York City to contribute archaeological reconnaissance, data collection, and documentation in remote corners of the Southwest. His adventures resonated. Not that I, a nomadic freelance writer, seemingly had anything in common with a wealthy businessman from New York City. As snow fell and the temperatures dropped outside the Jeep, Bernheimer's mission statement encouraged me to instill a love for nature, even in its bleakest and sternest mood, where the conventional exhibits of beauty are not found, but where beauty, if the traveler wishes to see, exists in fullest measure, and to urge upon others to do as I have done. Exactly 100 years earlier, Bernheimer's first expedition has passed right by my campsite. I filled in the white page of snow and solitude with visions of old explorers and a pack train sitting around a campfire. Bernheimer's whimsical tone directed me not only to turn the page, but in time to also follow his path. My unexpected connection to Bernheimer deepened when I received an email from my friend, archaeologist Bill Light. Morgan, maybe you could take on the Bernheimer Expeditions one of these days. Life encouraged me to consider hiking Bernheimer's 1929 route, an unfathomable journey encompassing over 300 miles of present-day Bears Ears National Monument and Glen Canyon National Recreation Area. The challenge captivated and terrified me. Physically, I knew I was capable of such an endeavor. I had spent many of my days running and backpacking long distances in the backcountry, but this would be several hundred miles farther than I had ever gone in one push. Bernheimer's book is not a guidebook. His month-long pack trips did not follow signs or define trails, and his murky notes are hardly directions. It is unclear if this was intentional or because Bernheimer had no idea where the hell he was. He alluded to both. While he initially hoped to inspire other people's adventures, by 1924 he admonished, "I do not recommend that others follow in our footsteps, excepting for scientific purposes." The duality of his messaging made the idea more irresistible, but I filed it in the backcountry of my mind. Besides, there was too much snow on the ground to go hiking. During long winter nights, curled up in my Jeep, I read anything I could get my hands on related to Bernheimer's expeditions, Glen Canyon and Bears Ears. I kept a pile of topo maps under the blankets and marked locations in Bernheimer's stories to begin to piece his routes together. Between his written pages and my own imagination, I had the urge to examine something deeper. Why was Bernheimer so drawn to exploring this landscape? I was still trying to understand the same question about myself. Only more time spent out on the land could expose an answer. To enrich my research, I contacted John Wetherell's great-grandson, Harvey Leake. He has studied the Bernheimer expeditions extensively, even retracing portions of their routes on backpacking trips. Harvey responded quickly, and 3 days later, we met up to talk and look at maps at the Grand Canyon Historical Society convention in the Grand Canyon. Harvey gave me a brief overview of John Wetherell's life as an explorer and guide in southern Utah's canyon country. He also owned and operated training posts in Kayenta, Arizona on the Navajo Nation, where he lived with his family. Then Harvey abruptly shifted the direction of the conversation and insisted on reading something to me. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a book titled Wolf Killer, Wisdom from a 19th Century Navajo Shepherd. Wolf Killer, a Dene elder, was a close friend and neighbor to the Wetherell family and influenced their philosophy about life. Harvey turned to an earmarked passage and read aloud. "The path of light is always running beside us on either side, but we cannot see it for the darkness in our hearts. Now we have decided to have some ceremonies and pray for our minds to turn into the path of light. I should not fear the future. You must live today and keep your thoughts in the path of light. Everything will come out all right. You must always think that the next year of your life will be more happy and peaceful than the year before, and must try to make it come true." Harvey explained that the story stemmed from the Dene cultural belief in personal choice, that the outcomes of our lives and our contributions to society are directly linked to the decisions we make. Harvey then set the book down and looked me directly in the eyes. "When you get to a fork in the trail, will you choose the path of progress or the path of light?" This is not what I anticipated at a meeting to discuss maps. The question prompted me to look at the terrain within, as well as the prevailing winds that pushed me to this place in my life. I ended my marriage in 2017. The divorce settlement granted me my Jeep and what I owed in taxes. The painful circumstances warranted starting my life over. Without a dollar to my name, I drove from my beloved home in the Eastern Sierra Range of Light to Utah's Red Rock Canyons, where the safety of solitude and horizon of unknown possibilities felt limitless. Embraced by sagebrush and sandstone, I generously refilled potholes with tears, I sought out the desert not merely to hide from my problems. I needed the open space to heal and dream of what lay ahead. I lost almost everything but won my freedom, and with it, an opportunity to finally pursue writing. I quit my marketing job and became a hunter-gatherer of stories. The financial insecurity was daunting, but hunkering in the wild allowed me to save money by not spending any money between my meager paychecks. I subsisted on cold bean burritos, nut butter, beef jerky, and warm beer because I didn't even own a cooler. Lingering in remote places and writing about them became the divine luxury of my untethered life. If I stayed in the desert long enough, I trusted it would give me a sense of direction. One trip blurred into a season and then 3 more. Even in the bone-chilling troughs of winter or the bellows of summer heat, my instincts told me to stay. Harvey snapped me out of my contemplative trance, asking again, will you choose the path of progress or the path of light? Eyes wide open, I replied, I choose the path of light. I knew deep down this was the path I needed to follow. Harvey smiled and pulled out an old map to Rainbow Bridge. He then handed me a copy of Wolf Killer. This, he assured me, would be most helpful of all. We waved goodbye and I tiptoed through the icy parking lot to the Jeep. Daggers of blinding sun obstructed my rear view as I pulled out of the parking lot and headed north to Bears Ears. I arrived late that night, the new moon concealing White Mesa uranium mill located on Ute Mountain Ute land. The winter chill had deterred other campers. The desert gave me the freedom to choose a refuge where, if only for a night, both the land and my heart could conceal our wounds and truly rest. The desert is less nature's blank slate than it is ever-growing chronicle, collecting stories for a millennium and sharing them with those willing to listen. Collective marks left here have the potential to build upon a tradition or tear it apart. Mistakes compound in the desert. A single footprint in delicate cryptobiotic soil or a name carved in sandstone alter the desert's story. No matter the intention, these once tiny marks accumulate as human visitation continues to exponentially increase. The desert documents more clearly how we behave than is evident in less dry and exposed places. The lens of Bernheimer's journals unraveled my understanding of a region on the brink of irreversible harm. A century later, Bernheimer would not even recognize this place. Mineral extraction blighting the mesas and polluting groundwater, a uranium boom poisoning indigenous communities, Glen Canyon Dam halting the natural flow of the Colorado River, highways cutting through geological formations, rampant looting of ancestral sites, footsteps and tire tracks for millions of tourists a year across delicate soils. The abuses inflicted on the land since Bernheimer passed this way raise an urgent question. How can we protect this landscape for the next 100 years and beyond? Bernheimer fell in love with this part of the desert Southwest, which spurred him to reorient his focus from research to conservation. Before his 1929 trip, Bernheimer proposed Rainbow National Park, hoping to protect portions of the Navajo Nation, Glen Canyon, and Rainbow Bridge from development. By 1931, his vision expanded to include areas of present-day Bears Ears, and eventually it converged with the proposed 1937 Escalante National Monument. Though the national park never came to fruition, Bernheimer's dream eventually rippled towards the present-day Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante National Monuments. The last century reflects the clashing values of preserving the natural world and extracting a resource from it in the name of so-called progress. In 1963, a dam in Lake Powell Reservoir drowned 186 miles of Glen Canyon, 96 tributary canyons, a riparian wildlife habitat, and a cultural landscape worthy of the same protections as Bears Ears. It's proof that the worst can happen. Bernheimer does not come across as vindictive or the type to say, I told you so, but no doubt he would be on the front lines of restoring both Southern Utah monuments today. A free-range life can be daunting. As I moved through the worlds of Navajo and Cedar Mesa sandstone, the Bernheimer Expeditions gave me a sense of direction and a light to guide me home. After my meeting with Harvey in 2019, I began following bits and pieces of Bernheimer's routes around the Four Corners to Rainbow Bridge and into the Glen Canyon backcountry. The hikes focused my direction in country so brimming with possibility, it can swallow wanderlusters like me whole. But it took me 2 years to muster the courage to retrace his expedition his 1929 expedition. The outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic and a complete Jeep breakdown halted my progress next year. Distanced from the desert and my once wild life, I found myself in circumstantial domesticity and societal chaos. I desperately needed to release myself back into my natural habitat. On March 17, 2021, I took the first step. For over 1 month, I immersed myself in the heart of Glen Canyon and the farthest edges of Bears Ears. I hiked with Bernheimer's spirit across Mancos Mesa, down Grand Gulch, and through golden waves of Navajo sandstone, to the confluence of the San Juan and Colorado rivers, now flooded by Lake Powell, and up White Canyon to Natural Bridges National Monument. On this archive-induced hallucinatory vision quest, I carried Bernheimer's journals and photos. These are an elegy to a lost world. Deciphering Bernheimer's enigmatic notes initially provided a refuge from my personal woes, until the desert finally made me face those too. Through my efforts to protect the wild spaces, I am learning to defend the backcountry of my spirit by walking away from people and places that harm my homeostasis. The clear desert light exposes new passageways and, on the horizon, hope. But it takes courage to step toward them. To love Glen Canyon is to love a tortured soul. Perhaps it would be wise to walk away and abandon my hope that it will fully reclaim its freedom. But that is not in my nature. I like to see things through. At the confluence, sunlight reflects off the faint river current threading below the reservoir surface, where the drowned river flows on. In time, the river will reclaim its power by refusing to be a slave to ours. Human attempts to control the environment are failing while nature continues its course. 92 years after Bernheimer's pilgrimage, I am anguished by the human impacts and optimistic for change. The future waits between these realities. How you proceed requires our delicate attention. I walk alongside Bernheimer with hopeful steps, witnessing a landscape miracle. At nature's pace, there is time for renewal. Okay, so hopefully that brings into focus where we are, and I have just totally given myself away and how much I'm in love with Glen Canyon and the desert. And so on that note, let's shift gears and go back to your piece of paper. And I would like you just to jot down just one or two things quickly about why you love the place you wrote down, and then what are you afraid could happen to your place? Like in my case, there are uranium mines, a dam. These things could have already happened in a place that you love, or there could be looming threats. So just jot those down, something to think about. And then we'll move on. So early on, I got a hold of this book, Bernheimer's book, and I was living alone in my Jeep. And so I really enjoyed having these historical characters and their stories in the same places, and it brought it to life. And then when I was hiking alone in the winter, I didn't feel so lonely. John, some of these guys did their most pivotal exploring in the depths of winter. And so suddenly I felt like I was a part of some sort of tradition, even though, well, there's no one around here and I feel like an outcast from society. And yet history was telling me people do this, people come here, people love this place, and this is what explorers do. So Bernheimer had quite the Led Zeppelin supergroup of a team, and this is definitely something that was afforded to him by his wealth. He hired the best guides in the region, Zeke Johnson, who was a man of all trades. We should put him in charge of managing Western public lands if he was alive today. He worked as the custodian of Natural Bridges National Monument. He was a rancher, he was a miner, he was a local Mormon family man, and a huge conservationist. And so he really had the pulse on not only the landscape, but all the different ways our land is used and managed today and back then as well. Next is John Wetherell, who's probably one of the more dropped names in this crew. And John was, a very famous explorer. He was some of the earliest recorded white folks to go and poke around in Grand Gulch and Mesa Verde. But more importantly, he had a very strong and important relationship with the indigenous communities. And he ended up moving to Kayenta, and throughout his life in his explorations and his guiding, he worked closely with his indigenous friends, both in teams to explore, but as allies and as a bona fide part of the community, helping people through the Spanish flu and other hard times. And so really lived at the heart of Glen Canyon throughout his life. Not just physically, but in spirit. He's a part of the place. And then the other key team member was Earl Halstead Morris, a famous archaeologist, and he was supplied to Bernheimer for the American Museum, which granted this team a permit to do archaeological reconnaissance legally. And Earl is rumored to have been the inspiration for Indiana Jones. It's been denied, but I like to think that Old Indy was after him. And then on each trip, Bernheimer and his team hired a crew of Dene guides from the Navajo Nation. And some came back year after year, often rotated, or they would come back, or often they would encounter men met along the trail. There's a reference of a Neil Judd book for anyone out there, and hire them on the spot and pay them very fair wages. I did the math, and often the rate they were given was what like John Wetherell's annual salary was to be the custodian of Rainbow Bridge National Monument. So they would give the equivalent of a year's salary for a 1-month trip. It's not, it's hard to think these trips today, it'd probably be like $200. But that comparison of, John would get paid $200 to do a year of work, and they would give these guides, that shows that it was a very fair and respected part of the team. They also hired local wranglers, usually younger Mormon San Juan County cowboys, which made a fun element. An important note is that these guys, so Zeke and John and old Bernie, were all in their 50s to 60s during these expeditions, which is quite impressive and something that I find so intriguing about these trips. And then Earl was in his 30s through early 40s, and then the cowboys were sometimes like 19 years old. So quite the age range on these trips, very diverse. And Bernheimer liked to call his teams the rough and ready soul corral, because Bernheimer was a Jew, there were Mormons, John Wetherell was a Quaker, Earl Morris was an atheist, then the Dene guides had their cultural traditions. And so these people whose lives would have been so vastly different would come together for these trips. Before I get too carried away with the whole team, though, I do want to read you a little bit of something about Bernheimer, our main guy. Bernheimer's vision for his expeditions originated an ocean apart from the desert in Danube, Baden-Württemberg, Germany, where he was born in 1864. His parents' home was built on the base of one of Charlemagne's castles, and the Roman wine cellar was their basement. Living atop a foundation of European history, Bernheimer's imagination migrated west at an early age. His favorite books to read as a child were about the Southwest and its mystery to be penetrated only by the most hardy and brave. These stories laid the foundation for a wish, and the romances and exquisite description of Zane Grey contributed their share to his dream. He attended school in Geneva, Switzerland until 1881, when at age 16, he went to New York City to work at his uncle's dry goods business. He performed a myriad of jobs until he became president of Bear Mill Manufacturing Co. in 1907 and shifted the company's focus to cotton textiles. He married Clara Silberman, the daughter of a successful silk manufacturer, and they had 2 daughters. The family lived in a multi-story Manhattan brownstone, complete with servants and secretaries to help them handle day-to-day affairs. Bernheimer's wealth allowed him to submit to that craving for adventure and to turn his vacations to something more substantial. The relative proximity of New York to the Southwest, compared to Germany, a mere train ride across the country, allowed him to realize his boyhood dream at the age of 55, and his first backcountry expedition was in 1919. He said, "The desire to do this as an old man ended with a real craving to explore and to endure the hardships that go with the penetration into the unknown, uncharted regions, taking chances finding water, food for the animals, passable trails, and a way in and out. The charm and lure of exploring, once it yields to its craving, becomes irresistible. The contrast between such exploits and one's daily occupation has unique attraction." And so here's this guy who is, Bernheimer wrote articles for the New York Times about labor negotiations and workers' rights, and his first book was A Gentleman's Guide to Ending World War I. This is a well-respected intellectual man, and yet his childhood storybooks inspired these vacations and to go on these very creative and out of his element trips. and led him to fall in love with this desert and want to protect it. And I think that's what hooked me on Bernheimer, is the fact that the whimsy of story and adventure and protecting places, and then, you know, being whatever you are, can all go hand in hand. And this felt like something really relatable and important for travelers 100 years later through these landscapes, who are becoming more aware of the importance of protecting these landscapes. What started as a very solo endeavor with me feeling kind of crazy, being friends with characters in my books, but Bernheimer did it too, so that's okay. I ended up meeting lots of friends along the way who had also followed Bernheimer or had a strong connection to this history, or were connected to the land through both the Paiute and the Navajo tribe. And that is still the most mind-blowing thing to me, that I think that's what affirmed that this path of light was really something to follow. And Harvey's story was not just a cool idea, it was something very real, because how could this happen? But what was most important about this, other than it's fun to hike with people, is experiencing a community of people who also love the desert and who also want to protect it. And there's so much power in that. And I'm grateful for all of you who are attending tonight, because I view you also as an extension of that community of people who care about the desert. And that's really what we're here for tonight. I'll just quickly go through this. On the top left, that is Clyde Whiskers, who is a Paiute elder who passed away due to COVID-19, very, very dear friend to me. Next to him, we have Fred Blackburn, historian, and his friend Dave Wilson. They've worked together for 30 years. Dave Wilson lives and works in Canyon del Muerto, and it was an honor to travel with them through the canyon. Then top right is Bill Light, very well-known archaeologist, both in Glen Canyon and Bears Ears National Monument, and pretty much the father of conservation archaeology, and was one of the last people to study Glen Canyon before it was flooded by the dam. Then the bottom, we have Joel Arnold, one of my favorite hiking buddies. We go on many trips together. Then Leo Mannheimer, who is the former chapter house president of Navajo Mountain and a former Navajo Nation water commissioner. Harvey Leek, the great grandson of John Wetherill, who is also an amazing historian and tremendous hiker and storyteller. And he's the person to really give a history lecture on this topic, let me tell you. Next to him is Jim Nittmeyer, who is the foremost expert on historic inscriptions in the Colorado Plateau. And then Steve Allen, probably the most intrepid modern day explorer and canyoneer and historian, has covered more of this terrain than anybody. And I feel very comfortable saying that because he is out there now. He never stops, age 72. Incredible. And then lastly, on the far bottom right of the screen, we have Ralph R.E. Barillo, who is an archaeologist who I really met because of Bears Ears and has become one of my best friends and comrades in loving and protecting place, which brings me kind of into a segue, something I'd like to read. Hopefully you guys aren't going to get tired of me reading. But he really explained to me that there was something different about Bears Ears and that I was also there for a reason, but also this idea of how we give back to the places that take care of us, which will be our next writing prompt. Get ready. A few years ago, Ralph and I sat in our tailgates near the Bears Ears after a hike. Still getting to know each other, he asked me why I felt so drawn to be here. I told him it was something different I felt here, that I could safely process trauma from my past. I never needed to hold myself together as I howled in pain and joy. The solitude allowed nature to soothe my rattled nerves. Learning to trust my feet in new terrain helped me regain the strength to rebuild my life. Writing about these experiences awakened my voice. Ralph sat in his camp chair, the Bears Ears looming in the background. He explained to me that Bears Ears is seen by many Indigenous people as a place of healing, especially for women who have experienced trauma. Ralph gleaned this information about the Bears Ears from Eric Dekshini, a Dene tribal member and former Arizona Democratic representative. The Dene associate this area with changing Bear Maiden, and Ralph explained that the ears represent where her body lies following a heated exchange that erupted after she was tricked into marrying wily old Coyote. Today, people traditionally gather healing plants and medicines here, especially, though not exclusively, by and for women. Both Hopi and Ute people have different stories about the formations, but Ralph had not been given permission by tribal members to share them. He looks up towards the Bears Ears and takes a long pause before resuming. Mother Bear is the guardian to the north, healer and watcher over the land and its peoples. With tear-filled eyes, Ralph looked into mine resolutely and said, I do not think it is a coincidence that you're here. My resolve to remain in Bears Ears deepened its roots. Months later, I met two Dene women who worked on the ferry at Hall's Crossing on Lake Powell. After letting me ride on the boat for fun, they invited me over to their employee housing complex for dinner and a shower. As they taught me to make fry bread, I asked them about the Bears Ears. They told me that some women go there to cry and heal. One of the women insisted that if I felt like I needed to go, I should trust my instincts. This has given me a clear reason to return this winter, not only for my personal healing, but as a penance to place. Among the many things I have gleaned while hiking with Ralph, it's his belief in repaying a karmic debt to the places that provide pleasure, wisdom, and healing. It's something that I am now devoted to as well. To dwell anywhere, there is always a cost. In lieu of rent or a mortgage, I vowed to give back and help protect Bears Ears by writing and advocating for it. So before we get into our karmic debts that we will unleash later tonight, our next little prompt for your piece of paper is to think about how the place you love also loves you back. I know it might be a little bit out there to think of a place in this way, but I think it's really important because it's not just about what you are experiencing or seeing, but you are gaining something. There is love, there's exchange. My dad in the Eastern Sierra, when we would go to Yosemite, he would always say, when we're surrounded by all that granite, that we were getting a granite hug, that there was something about the rocks that was soothing and comforting and hugging us. And that is the land showing us love. It is not something to just take from. This is an exchange of energy, and we are living with the land, not just in it, we're on it. So that's another prompt. This is a photo of Bernheimer at Rainbow Bridge in, let's just say 1920 through 1922, so about 100 years ago. And then there's another photo, present day photo of Rainbow Bridge next to it. And his first three expeditions, so yeah, 3 of his early expeditions were at Rainbow Bridge. And he was enamored. He wanted to get to the bridge in every direction. He couldn't get enough of it. Before he ever went, his wife said, Charlie, you have to go see Rainbow Bridge. You're never going to rest if you don't go to this place. And I'm sure she thought, okay, he's got to get this out of his system. Bernheimer, Bernie as I call him, he started going every year and then became so hooked that, that he had to get the gang together for an expedition every year and started to expand out beyond Rainbow Bridge. But coming full circle, Rainbow Bridge became the focus of his realization as they were exploring possible dams on the Colorado River, that this place could become damaged and changed by development. And so to think that 100 years ago, this contrast between loving a place and fearing for its future was already very, very real. Okay, which brings me to the 1929 expedition. So in 1929, Bernheimer did this massive 300 and something mile loop covering most of present-day Bears Ears National Monument and Glen Canyon. And this was the route that kind of fixated me, because this was both the place that I spend the most time. It's the place I wrote on my Valentine's Day card that we're making. And yet he went to places that I had never been before, and his journals were so convoluted, and it became this puzzle to try and figure out where he went. And Steve Allen and Harvey Leak were absolutely a joy to team up with and sit and look at maps and figure out, well, he described it this way, maybe he went here. But besides it being a great challenge to figure out where he went, and the reason why I don't just have a map of, well, here's the route, is a lot has changed. There are now highways through parts of the route. There's an entire reservoir that flooded. would roughly say 50 to 75 miles of the trip. And so figuring out how to follow his route closely, but also adapt it to the present development was an incredible challenge. And really my objective through the whole thing was to see how much the land changed, not to say Bernheimer was right here and I'm exactly right. It wasn't a game of precision, although I think it was pretty close. But really it was to have these moments like this. We're looking out at, this is Gretchen Bar, an old mining stock trail where they used to have a whole gold mining operation there. And now it abruptly ends in a cliff. And this is not the same place in Bernheimer's picture, but it's just that sense of looking at, you know, these men standing on a river and now it's a reservoir. But an interesting time because the water is getting lower and so things are also coming back. This is the same spot. This is the Great Bend in the San Juan River, but the angle is a little off. But the water used to be backed up here from Lake Powell and now it's gone down so much that the river is back and it looks almost identical to what Bernheimer witnessed. And it's fun to share this today as Lake Powell's water is at the lowest level it has been since the dam began filling in the 60s. I think it's 3,522 feet. So things are coming back, especially in the farther upper reaches of Lake Powell, where rivers are returning. And so it was incredible to see that contrast of, okay, this is lake, but then, you know, this is lake, but then you go to a different spot. It's like, oh, river's returning. These are some inscriptions that Bernheimer and John Wetherill left on their expedition. You know, that's also a point of contention back, you know, 100 years ago. That was how explorers, you know, of course, there's some ego, like kind of staked that they were there, but it was also documentation purposes. And I cover quite a bit in the book. I've learned from friends like Bill Leip and Fred Blackburn, who have used these inscriptions to help piece together where cultural objects were removed and unfortunately taken to museums, which is helping future efforts to repatriate and make sense of what went where. And so even though today, if you sign your name on a sandstone wall in the desert, you're an asshole. But these are really important. And I share this. It's not something I'm going to go into terrible depth about tonight, but it's really important. So if you see these, it's a part of history and it's ultimately going to be used to help bring items back to tribes that they were taken from. This is Clay Hills Pass, which is now has a highway going up it, if anybody's familiar with that. Again, contrast, lake, river. At times it's hard to watch that. These are just some fun photo matching. Now we're just moving into fun slideshow mode for a break here. Okay, this is the confluence of the San Juan and the Colorado River. This was kind of the focus of Bernheimer's 1929 expedition. And this expedition was really where he got the grand idea to designate a national park. I think it was the fuel for his fire to later that year start petitioning, and he was doing presentations in Washington, D.C., sending park personnel out to meet up with John Wetherill for tours to Rainbow Bridge. John Wetherill even took like an upriver quest through Glen Canyon to take photos to show everyone that this was a place worthy of protecting. And so to see it today underwater and to hear things like, well, it was just the place that no one knew, it's absolutely a lie, because it was not only a place that people like Bernheimer knew and loved and wanted to protect, and vocally so, it was also the home to many indigenous people from the Navajo Nation, the San Juan Southern Paiute tribe, Hopi, Ute, Pueblo of Zuni has many ties to the area. And so where we're at today, which is a reservoir that's rapidly going bye-bye, it's just, to me, it's probably one of our greatest mistakes as a nation, which there are many. Probably second to all the broken treaties to indigenous tribes. This is Bernheimer's National Park map. It didn't come to fruition. Dams were built. There's still lawsuits to try and unprotect Bears Ears and Grand Staircase. I'm glossing a lot of this over because at this point it's all in the news and it's just a horrendous ping pong. But really the important thing is that, let's go here, that we're thinking about land protection differently. And this is Bears Ears National Monument, which is at the forefront of how this idea to protect land 100 years ago, which was so important, but how it's evolved into something much more positive and going in a different direction. 100 years ago, public lands protection was very centered on, essentially was removing Indigenous people from their land. And it was a form of colonization and forced removal. Canyon de Chelly, which is pictured here, is different in that it's co-managed with the Park Service and the Navajo Nation, and people still live within the park boundaries. It's still a very complicated history we're not going to have time to get into here, but Bernheimer's vision for his national park was more aligned with that. He wanted to make sure that these beautiful parts of Glen Canyon and the Navajo Nation were protected from development, but also like nobody's homes or their lives were disrupted. And it's well documented that he had this vision for this unique park. But it, at the time, that was a start. Today, what we have with Bears Ears is co-management. And so it's weird to think that in some ways it's good that things were protected now, because there's a new opportunity, and that's for tribes to really have the input and the say on the same level as land managers of what happens and how these places are protected. And I know Bernheimer would be fully on board, and it's too bad he's not here because I think he would have done some great work to help protect that place. And so, yeah, I mean, I think this is where we're at, with the water levels going so low in the Colorado River and Lake Powell, the future of protecting landscapes, both, some people not wanting big national monuments in Western public lands, while on the other hand, tribes have this amazing place to be involved. There's many good things happening. There's many scary things happening. And so we're at this place where that question that Harvey Leak asked me, do we choose the path of progress or the path of light? It doesn't just apply to our personal lives, but it applies to where we go as a society. And one of the things I believe deeply in is our love of place can help shift the direction of things. And that's where I think Bernheimer can be the greatest influencer of this generation as well, because you're not going to stand for bad things to happen to something you truly love. So some ways that we can give back to the places that we wrote down on our Valentine's Day card are joining conservation groups that do the heavy lifting, both legally and on the ground, to protect places. Obviously following all BLM and Forest Service regulations, good leave no trace practices. If you're one of those people that wants to really get involved when there's public comment periods to weigh in on detrimental or positive management efforts on public lands, that's a really good way to get involved. And then just becoming a member of conservation groups that are working in the places that you love, both the far away and close by, because they'll have all the latest updates on what's happening or ways you can get involved, petitions, volunteer efforts, and all of those things. Okay, I'm going to cut myself off now and turn it over. I guess before we do questions, I would love to see I guess not pictures, if people could type in the places that they picked that they loved. I would just love to see that. And I don't know how to do this. Help. Got the chat.
So Morgan, I see the Grand Staircase Escalante, Berea Plateau, North Rim of the Grand Canyon, Nakewood Granaries, Disappointment Valley, Joshua Tree, the LaSalle Mountains, the Green River, Rainbow Bridge, Pollywog Bench, High Meadow at Mount Rainier. And I know I missed some.
Oh, that's a beautiful list. Wow, there's a lot of love in this room, this virtual room.
Within sight of Navajo Mountain, the Escalante River.
Mm,
Bravo, the land has a powerful advocate in you. Thank you. The Wind Rivers, Green Mountains of Vermont.
wow. Can feel the love of those places in here, and I'm happy that there's some very familiar ones to me, and then others that I know are home to other people, and so yeah, thank you all for being here, and I really appreciate the love of place in this room. I know it's that type of crowd, and I maybe don't need to say some of the things that I said, but I hope that it also inspires you to share these messages of loving place with the people you care about, and to the people that you encounter out on the land.
Hey, Morgan. Is it a good time then to ask you some questions?
Yeah, I can't believe I rambled a long time. Okay, ask me questions or shut me up.
No. Well, I'm going to ask you a couple questions before I'm just going to open it up to the audience tonight. Did Bernheimer write about what he saw coming from New York City and the city life? Did he write about what he saw and wanted to protect 100 years ago? You know, I think about what we see and what we want to protect today. What did he write about, and what did he want to protect?
So a lot of that came in his correspondence about his national park proposal. And so he really wanted to protect at the core Rainbow Bridge. That was his main focus. And then he had kind of 3 different plans that emanated out from that and included part of Glen Canyon, the Navajo Mountain area, Monument Valley. And then by that was all in 1929. And by 1931, a newspaper article came out, and that plan had grown to include much of present-day Bears Ears and the San Juan Goosenecks. All of these are areas that he traveled to on his expeditions. And he had his entire team's support, showing Park Service personnel around to protect these places. So there was a direct correlation to places that he had experienced deep time. A month, a year is still substantial for someone from far away, and to do that for a decade. And so really that deep time with the land directly correlated to what he wanted to protect.
Okay, and how did he balance that out with the fact that most of the land he wanted to protect was indigenous land? I think about colonization, and part of that is, back in the day, the National Park Service just took places over and kicked people out, indigenous people. What was his vision at the time? Was he looking at co-management back then?
Yeah, so that's a really important question, something that I really get into in the book, and it's a little bit of everything. It's something where I look at it and go, ooh, this is really complicated. And it was complicated back then. It really spurred a debate. Some people from the Park Service loved the idea. The Navajo Nation did not love the idea. But also Bernheimer was kind of in this out there position that wasn't really I don't think maybe a little ahead of his time to be believed or understood, but he didn't want anyone to be displaced and everyone to live within the national park. And so it seemed more that Bernheimer wanted to ensure that an oil company wouldn't come and start drilling in Monument Valley, or a dam built and flood Rainbow Bridge. And so that, the people living there could still live in a really nice and wonderful landscape, and those who visited, it would be preserved, and the cultural history and artifacts would be protected. He never used words like co-management, but he often cited Canyon de Chelly National Monument as the example, and that was very much a co-management situation. And so the evidence is there that that's the direction he wanted it to go. But this was all further complicated by the fact that another portion of the park proposal was on the former Paiute Strip, which had been removed from Paiute land into public domain, and then during the same era in the late 20s and early 30s was actually given back to the Navajo Nation. And so that whole kind of situation further complicated the park being proceeded, and also complicated things for the San Juan Southern Paiute people who no longer had reservation lands of their own.
Interesting. Very fascinating. I was unaware of that. I'm sure you're aware of Roger Toll and the Park Service's quest toward Escalante National Monument, just to the north of what Bernheimer was looking at. And it's fascinating, in that area, the state of Utah was dead set against
Oh yeah.
what the Park Service was trying to do, which is interesting as a perception. The Navajo wanted nothing to do with the Park Service, and neither did Utah.
Yeah, and it really did, in both cases, a fair element of that did have to do with grazing. Just this fear that it would impede on their rangeland and their ability to, the state of Utah was dead against the Escalante National Monument, which, if you trace the lineage of that, it still is connected to Bernheimer's vision for this national park. And the Navajo Nation was also concerned with grazing and rangeland, and it was much bigger part of the local economy and lifestyle then, as compared to now, and actually was a much more serious problem then, especially before 1934 with the Taylor Grazing Act. There was far more cattle on the land, and so the concern about the pinching off of places to graze was because there was so much land that was overgrazed. They wanted to have as much as possible. And so the idea of cattle grazing not being allowed in an area was terrifying because, well, they just didn't want to admit there were too many cows.
Right. And of course, hydropower was something that Utah was targeting as well. But the Taylor Grazing Act really put the Park Service in a panic. But as you say, that wasn't until the 30s. So Bernheimer was doing this in the 20s. Again, that resistance was happening then.
Mm-hmm.
I just find it fascinating. If you're willing, I'd like to unmute everyone and go to questions. Let's see. I know there's a way to do this. And what I'm going to do is just slowly go down the line.
Okay.
Ask people to unmute themselves. If anybody has a question, please jump in.
Don't be shy.
Everybody's quiet.
Okay, I'll ask a question. My name's Marietta, and I'm just curious about when they establish monuments, which is a great thing and intended for conservation and preservation, how do they deal with the fact that when you designate a landscape, people will come and you're bringing impact with that designation without the funding to manage it?
We need someone from the BLM here to answer this question for us, because it is a serious issue and a real concern, and not one that I have a clear answer to, other than, yeah, you said it there. That's a real possibility. There's more attention on an area. There's increased encouragement to visit, but I think in Bears Ears National Monument, there's only a handful of BLM and Forest Service rangers to manage an area of 1.36 million acres. And so,
yeah, I did work for the BLM, so I'm retired, and it's just kind of
you should answer this question. You shouldn't be asking me.
No, because this is a question I still don't have the answer to after decades.
Yeah.
How do you resolve these two things? And I do appreciate your advocacy for this, and this is one way to do it with your words and with dedicating the money from this effort. But I just don't know now as a citizen how to be a better advocate myself.
I agree. And I think this brings up something that again, at each one of these topics could be a whole topic of itself. But it's a fine line and one that gets confused. Loving a place does not mean, and I think more people should go there. And it's also complicated when I say that, because I'm not saying like, oh, it's not gatekeeping either. This whole thing of, these are public lands that are open for all to visit. But I do think, as with all things, whether it's eating or using social media or how much we drive, we all need to be cognizant of how we're placing ourselves in these places and being moderate and aware and as low impact as possible, and seeing that as a way to love these places. And, sure, it's great to go and take pictures and share that, but not geotagging, not pointing people to sensitive sites. And so, there's more people on the planet than ever before. I mean, an unfathomable amount more since Bernheimer was out there 100 years ago. And so there's going to be more people on every inch of the planet. And so the only remedy I can think of that is for us to show love by being so cautious and having so much reverence and treading so lightly, and thinking about how we move through the land and how we visit, or how often we go to certain places or when we visit, and consider not just our travels, but the wildlife. And this isn't to dissuade anyone. I mean, I spend lots of time outside. There's a part of me that says, well, how can I, I'm out all the time, and everyone deserves to be out in these places but I think having that awareness and having that awareness funneled through love, if that can be shared with the increasing numbers of people, that's a good start. That's my little hopeful seed there.
I love your optimism. Thank you.
Morgan, may I say something?
Yes, please.
This is Mike Walters. Okay, this sort of goes with what was it Lynn there just said? Okay, this is what I really believe. It's so much of our destruction of this backcountry is because of guide services, commercial services, be it BLM land up on the Paria Plateau, like White Pockets or the Wave or whatever, or down on the Grand Canyon on the river, that it's mainly just commercial people that get the cream of the crop, and it's all because of money. They need to take that out of the equation, and it's public land for a reason, is what it's called, public land. And so commercial industry shouldn't even have a say in any of this. They shouldn't be able to be out in these areas. That's bringing in people that have no idea what they're doing. And then it brings in more people. And then, like you said about photographs, they leave their location on, or they show something in the background that brings more people in. And they go, oh, well, I've seen that. I can find that spot. And so a lot of it is the commercial guide services, be it ATV or just four-wheel drive, like I said, up on the Paria, or down in the canyon on river trips. I got a lot of guide friends on the river, but all that's destroying it. And how hard is it to get a private trip? And so I think it needs to be rerouted somehow, that not as much commercial industry happens in the backcountry, and it's more reliant just on us people that just walk out there and check it out ourselves, without all the guidebooks, without all the signs that have been put up, and without the route numbers. They keep putting more things on these. It just makes it more feasible, more easy to find for everyone, and that just destroys it more quickly. So, I mean, I don't know what else to say, but that's my take on the whole thing.
And I think it's sentiments like that that really show that you love these places and have thought deeply about them. And these are really complicated dilemmas. I mean, commercial guiding has existed. Bernheimer hired commercial guides. So there's a legacy of that's just continues to grow. And these are all management questions, just like the growth of our western cities as the water decreases? Like, is there a cap on this growth, or do we just exponentially increase our use of the land to make money? I'm not going to even try and get into answering this, but I think that's where quality education, and in some cases just to play devil's advocate, guides can be really good, because they can be that first level of education and interaction when people are not familiar with an area, and they have a huge responsibility to educate the people. That doesn't mean that are the people that are hiking here, and help them understand that this isn't just a pretty place to take pictures. Is that always happening? No, but again, thank you for sharing your love for these places, and yeah, an important, this is the dilemma, not just in recreation on public lands, but the future of the West and how it grows. We have so many people and very finite resources.
Exactly.
Let me say something to Emily that she said, you know, I'm going to give a little example, since I worked at the Grand Canyon for so many years, year round at the North Rim. So I used to take a yearly burro ride down, because I shoveled all the tons buildings in the winter, and I'd be able to go down on the mules once a year. And yeah, did I say burros? Mules. But anyways, so on one of the trips, I was in good with all the guides, and we'd always talk, and I always believed them. Yeah, it's really good to have these people that shouldn't be in the back, that can't walk into the Grand Canyon, be in the Grand Canyon. And okay, on one of the trips, we're down at Roaring Springs. That's when we still could go to, they still went down to Roaring Springs. But anyways, the person got off the mule, and then she walked up to the restroom. And I'd say most people's front yard is tougher than getting to the restroom on this little ramp that goes up to it. And she fell and broke her ankle. And from then on, I go, no, people that shouldn't be in the backcountry shouldn't be in the backcountry, no matter how they do it. And I know some of you guys are going to go, oh, you elitist or whatever. But yeah, I am. I mean, thousands of miles, and I do care about it, but some people shouldn't. I can't do Everest, so why should it come down? Should there be an elevator on Everest for me? No. So, you know, it's the same for any of these areas. Maybe people that shouldn't be there, they don't have the means to do it on their own, shouldn't be there.
I appreciate how passionate you are about this, Mike, and I just want to steer this back, just because there's a lot of people with questions, and that is a really complicated topic and something we can talk about sometime on a hike. But I would like to just open this up if anyone else has any questions, and again, I'm not trying to shut you down. It's a really complicated topic, and I don't think it really necessarily fits why we're all here to talk about why we love these places tonight. This is Valentine's Day. Some people are here on dates. Questions? Anybody?
Hey Morgan, can I chime in?
Mhm.
Cool. This is Brian Krause.
Hi.
Hey, so just possibly to the insight and the approach of people at the time, Bernheimer and also his people of his ilk in the area. I don't know if you the story of Ephraim Pechtel, who pushed for Capitol Reefs protection at a similar area in history. And as far as pushing for national monument or national park distinction, it's not a surprise that Bernheimer did that. And the reason is, like, even if you look at the surrounding terrain, the Navajo Nation wasn't even codified to what it is now to 1934. They were adding pieces on. So the idea of what we conceive of as a reservation, as a set piece of land, that was dependent on a very piecemeal process that took place for years to play out. And for people that were looking for any kind of protection at the time, you wanted the biggest dog in the fight you can get. And a lot of people didn't, going to state legislatures was not really the goal, especially in the newer territories out in West. You really wanted to get federal government intervention so that you could have something reliable on the books. So that might be some insight as to why people at the time pushed for push for the highest level of preservation, because you wanted to have the biggest dog in the fight, and there were so few people that would have pushed for these distinctions at the time. It oftentimes took someone like Bernheimer that had either business or political connections to try to get any kind of traction. Because if you were some local presence out in some new Western state, very hard to make a noise out in Washington. So it makes sense that he wanted to push for that. And I even with it being interacting with the reservation in Indian lands, I could still see from his perspective why he would have wanted to do that.
Yeah, and there's a chapter I read about that, but the 1934 thing was the Paiute Strip going back to the Navajo Nation, and there's other parts of the boundaries that were in flux, even more recent times. It's a really complicated thing, and I do think part of it too, and what I love about Bernheimer is he was such a dreamer, is it also had a lot to do with how much he loved that landscape and the people who lived there, and he saw that it could be really something powerful and protected. And then the other reason to push for the national park was like you said, the highest level of protection, which would give it the best chance against dams, which doesn't always work out. Hetch Hetchy, Yosemite National Park, obviously, and they've proposed similar, but he gave it the best chance. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, things were very much in flux, and Bernheimer, he was a dreamer. He figured just because something hasn't been done before or done a certain way, he was an adventurer. He went for it.
Canyon Country draws dreamers.
Yeah, the Canyon Country does draw dreamers. There's no doubt about that. Well, are there any more questions? Maybe it's time to think about wrapping this up tonight. What do you think, Morgan? Are we good?
Yeah, thanks for coming, everyone. I hope you made some nice Valentines for the places you love, and if you're so inclined, go follow a conservation group that protects them, or it's usually $35 to become a member, including the Grand Canyon Historical Society that does such a great job of preserving the history of the Colorado Plateau, and which is an important piece of protecting these landscapes, understanding the history, and that this isn't just something that popped up on the news or some land grab because someone wants to put their name on a national monument. There are deep, long ties to protecting these incredible landscapes, and we are all part of the community of people who love these places and have a voice in helping to collectively protect them for the future.
Thanks, Morgan. I really appreciate your advocacy for the land. We need it. The land needs all the help it can get. I just want to remind everybody that Falling in Love with the Desert is available through the Grand Canyon Historical Society website online, and your purchase there is better than Amazon, because some of the cut of that funds then for the book goes to the Historical Society to bring you events like we just seen here with Morgan. And so thank you very much for that. A month from now, Shane Murphy will be presenting quite a different talk, and so hopefully we will see you all then. With that, thank you so much for attending this virtual outing here, February 14th, 2023. You all have a good evening and good night.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.